Welcome back. I hope everyone had a nice lunch. And now we'll start our first panel, the title of which is it time for women to run for office? I'm happy to invite the moderator of this panel, Ms. Sarah Treseder. She is a Chief Executive Officer at the Royal Yachting Association and a board member of the IOC Gender Equality in Sports Commission. Ms. Treseder, the floor is yours.
Is this on? Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. The floor is mine for about 3 seconds because before the fantastic panel that we have for you this afternoon, it is my real pleasure to introduce to you Halla Tomasdottir, who is come all the way from Iceland, a tiny nation riding high at the moment on a wave of sporting success. And when Halla isn't supporting her team, she is an entrepreneur, a businesswoman, was a presidential candidate in Iceland and a public speaker. And I know that she's going to inspire and energize all of you. So without further ado, Halla.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. I could not resist the opportunity to wear my national costume today. Is there anybody who doesn't know what happened yesterday? Of course you don't know. The Italians refuse to know. I've told them that they should look at their dentists. Maybe they will find a good coach. Sorry, Italians, for the joke is on you. You asked me to come here to speak about advancing women in leadership, something I'm incredibly passionate about. But because of what happened yesterday, when the tiniest country to make it to the World Cup, Iceland, beat Kosovo 2-0 as I flew over here, I actually took off from Copenhagen as we had just got the first goal, and I landed here when we had victory. And I have to say, my nation is having a party. I think they're still going since last night. There were fireworks everywhere, and I could probably spend my 15 minutes here today talking about what it took for a small country to punch above its weight in football the way our national team has done. But I am here to talk about women and advancing women in leadership. But I do think there are some parallels. It's taken a lot of hard work and a lot of heart to get there. And by the way, our women's football team has done an amazing job as well, but probably not gotten the same credit for it as our boys, to be quite honest. But I am proud of something else that we have done as a country, and that is the fact that we are leading the world when it comes to closing the gender gap. Along there with our Nordic sisters, although Denmark is missing from the top 10, we are the closest to being equal economies. And this has been great for both economic growth and social progress in the Nordic countries. I am a firm believer that this is key to success to any country, to any organization. But we didn't get there easily. It took a lot of hard work. And I like to give the credit to the women who came before me. This is a picture from October 24th in 1975. I was 7 at the time, and it happened to be my mom's birthday. She didn't bake any cake that day because all women in Iceland went on a strike for a day. They did no work, whether they held professional jobs or worked at home. And they literally brought the country to its knees because nothing works when women are not at work. Iceland showed its own country on that day, and it showed the world. And I believe this courage and this solidarity that women in Iceland showed that day paved the way for Iceland being the first country in the world to democratically elect a woman as president. Madam Vigdís, out there on the balcony of her home, a single mom with her daughter, often said that after she had been several years in office, she would get questions from little boys who would ask, Madam Vigdís, can a boy also grow up to become a president? Role models matter, not just for me as a little girl, almost 12 at the time, and all the women, but also for the boys raised during her presidency. So I don't take it lightly that I have the benefit of standing on the shoulders of these women who came before me. And I have always felt a strong need to matter on this issue because of these powerful role models that I've enjoyed. I've been involved in lots of different initiatives to bring about a gender-balanced leadership, and I believe perhaps the one that really brought it home for me was when I founded, along with another woman, an investment company in the infamous year 2007. Two of us met during a women's network, so don't underestimate the value of having women's networks, 7 years before this. But in 2007, in January, we met each other, and this was at the height of the financial bubble in Iceland. Everything seemed to be going incredibly well in our economy. But the two of us looked at each other. I was the CEO of the Iceland Chamber of Commerce at the time, the first woman, and she was an executive in investment banking. Both of us felt that there was something wrong with what was going on. We didn't believe that this fast, excessive, and highly leveraged growth could go on. We decided, after one glass of wine, and before we finished the second, that we wouldn't just talk about it, but we would found our own investment firm, probably the first founded by women, and we would work from a set of values that felt authentic to who we are and how we believe in working. So hence came the vision for the company, incorporating feminine values into finance. My friends, because I had spent my career until then surrounded by men, often the only woman on the team. My friends thought I was crazy. Some of them said, why would you do something women stuff when us boys actually like you? So it sounded like, why would you play 4th division football if you can play in 1st division? That's how we felt. Now this was 10 years ago. But we had a vision that we wanted to work. Of course we wanted to be profitable, but we wanted to achieve profit on the back of good principles. A year and a half later, our country infamously came tumbling down. The greatest economic casualty in economic history. Nearly all of our financial sector went under, but we did not. We didn't lose any money on behalf of our clients or our own balance sheet, and while team and timing always matter, I believe the most important ingredient in that success was that we were working on the back of good principles. More balanced principles than in the sector at the time. So I really became convinced of the value that women have to offer, and of the value of gender balance, and how sameness can become incredibly dangerous. It literally brought my country off the cliff. So 9 years later, after voicing my concerns about the underlying principles in my country, and sometimes about how little we have actually learned from the economic casualties that we all experienced to some extent in 2008, although very dramatically in my country, young people started a Facebook petition asking me to run for president of my country. I didn't know what had hit, because even if I had that role model from a young age, I had never really worked in politics, I had no experience of that field, and I never saw myself as running for president. But I was encouraged and challenged by friends and from these young people who thought what I was speaking about deserved to be spoken about from that platform. And I experienced loads of self-doubt and the infamous imposter syndrome. Who am I to run for president? I also experienced a lot of concern about what my decision to potentially run for president might do to my children, my 2 teenage children, a boy and a girl. Because running for office is not easy, and you will be talked about, at least if you are someone with a vision to bring about change. It was the most difficult decision I've ever had to make. And by all measure of things, most people probably would look at me and say, I've been successful. And yet I experienced these self-doubts and this imposter syndrome. Now, most women and men experience both, but we know from research that women are more likely to experience these self-doubts and these thoughts, these limiting thoughts that make you question and your confidence to run for office. We know from American research that 62% of men will consider running for office, but only 45% of women. So there's a 16% gap point between the genders in this. And we know that hasn't changed for 10 years. So it's still the same as it was 10 years ago. So there is a confidence gap, I believe, and I experienced it myself. And I hope one of the things we can talk about in our panel is actually how do we bridge that confidence gap. I made the decision to run, ultimately because I didn't feel like I could make another speech encouraging balanced leadership, encouraging girls and women to have the confidence to run, to let their voice be heard, to put their values to work, if I also, like everybody else, said, no, not me. Because believe me, before I made the decision, I tried to encourage a lot of other women who I thought would be better at running to do it. And most of them had reasons not to. So I am acknowledging the problem, that there may be a confidence gap here. But I also want to acknowledge that problem from another side later. Running for president turned out to be the journey of my life. It was an amazing experience. So all of my fears were really not needed, to be honest. More than 20 candidates announced their intention to run, and ultimately the race boiled down to the four of us, 3 men and me. And if I hadn't run, the conversation about the future of my country would have been between only men. And that would have been sad. I learned a lot on this journey. I faced a lot of challenges. 45 days before the election, the polls had me at 1%. Everybody asked me, are you going to quit? It was a humbling day, to say the least. But I was not a public persona, and I was definitely not getting the same attention as other candidates, so I was having a hard time getting my voice through. I decided on that day that even if I didn't know a lot about what it took to run for a president, the only thing I could do was to run as myself, because I had nothing to lose. So I stopped listening to the advice of those who thought they knew everything about politics and started being me. And things got better from then on. I faced a lot of challenges. Chief amongst them were the 3 M's, media, money, and muscle. I basically had about 1/3 the broadcast media of the leading candidate and about 1/3 of the money. I'm not saying that this is necessarily conscious discrimination, but it may be the consequence of unconscious bias, something I hope we also talk about. And I had no political muscle around me. Basically, I ran with family and friends and lots of entrepreneurial thinking young people, and I actually recommend that because we did break some of the rules of the game, and it worked. My chief strategic weapon was knowing not just why I ran, but how I was going to run my campaign. I had 4 principles, and I was very clear to run the campaign on all 4. I called them 4G, representing the letters in the Icelandic words. The first one was that I was running for office not because of me, my ego, or that I needed that job. I ran because I wanted to do good and be of service. That's what this was about. And I asked everyone working with me to have that mindset. Secondly, I decided to enjoy the journey. No matter what the outcome, I was going to have fun. It was a unique opportunity to get to know my country and get to know a lot about myself and those around me. And I really did have enormous fun. Third, I ran on the principle of transparency. Anyone asking to be in leadership today should really consider this one. I came from business and finance, and during the campaign, the Panama Papers broke out in my country, and our prime minister resigned. And we had lots of social unrest around the principles of business and possibly living in 2 separate nations. And to me, I just needed to let people know that they could ask me any questions, from do you have an account in Tortola to what my view was on the future of education. And every question I got, I placed on a website with a full answer. I actually responded myself to all questions I got. I stayed up a lot during those last few months because I thought it was important that my voice came through in all of those answers. I did Facebook Live sessions, I did Snapchat, which helped a lot with reaching young people, and I really tried as hard as I could in the little amount of time I had to be honest and transparent about who I am. Last but not least, I ran as a girl, and I ran for girls, and I made no excuses for it. And I really do think that was important. And perhaps these principles, because I didn't have the media or the money or the muscle on my side, but I did have these principles. And when the going got tough, and running for office means that the going is going to get tough, I went back to these principles, and I was clear on them. So on election night, I surprised everyone when the first numbers came in, and I was neck to neck to the leading candidate, a long way from the 1% day 45 days earlier. When all of the votes were counted, I actually was the runner-up in the elections, 10 percentage points ahead of the last poll, and a very long way from the 1% day. And I believe, again, I can thank the principles. But the win for me was not really about these numbers. The win for me was that I managed to go through the entire journey with my principles intact, with my family being okay. We actually grew from it as individuals and as family. It was an amazing experience, and I so wish someone had said that to me when I had all of those doubts. Because you don't need to win to actually get a lot out of the experience of running for office, offering yourself up to leadership. I had a lot of signs of positive impact. One of them was my own daughter. I kept my children out of the limelight of media, but on election day, there was no keeping them out of the limelight anymore. So my daughter got this question from a reporter: how do you feel? Hasn't it been strange to have your mom running for president? And she was so poised and so confident, she's 13, as when she explained, not at all. It's something I always expected her to do, and I'm so incredibly proud of her. And I was so incredibly proud of my daughter that day. And on Twitter, people put the hashtag that they found their presidential candidate for 2040. That was a win for me, and it meant a lot to see that I was able to do this, impacting my children in a positive manner. Another sign of positive impact. These are preschool girls walking around, and yes, I've been wearing this shirt quite a bit. This is when Iceland was in the Euro, and we became, and this says Go Iceland. And a mom sends me this picture. These are 3 preschool girls and a boy out for a walk. And they somehow, for some reason, find the reason to kiss me, or my picture. And this is very special to me, because when President Vigdis ran, there was a very famous meeting that she was running, one woman against 3 men, and in one of the meetings, a man asked her, how can you run? You're a woman. Not only are you a woman, you're half a woman, because she had had one breast removed as a breast cancer survivor. Yeah, but this was 1980. She responded, well, I intended on leading the nation, not breastfeeding it. She went high when others went low. That's leadership. So that picture where they almost look like I'm breastfeeding them is meaningful for me. And it's enough of a win for me. Role models do matter. I also earned a new title. I'm thinking about giving up all other titles and just using this one. But the New Yorker, as they followed the last debate, called me a living emoji of sincerity. Now, there was a time in my career in corporate America where I would have disliked that comment. But I have since learned that being a leader is not just about your rational abilities. It's at least as much about what I like to call your emotional capital. And women are particularly well equipped to put that to work. So I wear that title with pride. And I think that that's exactly what we need from leaders today. There's demand for people who care. But yet, knowing all of this, we're facing these numbers, whether we are talking about leadership in sports or leadership in business or entrepreneurship. Everywhere we have similar numbers. We have imbalance. So it is time for women to run for office because we need better leadership. But it's also time for all leaders to ask themselves, do I have the leadership that I need for my organization to survive the changes that are going on, the demands that the context is making of us? And I am not sure that the answer for many organizations is yes, because we have these imbalances everywhere. And according to the World Economic Forum, it may take us 80 to 160 years to get there. And I'm telling you, there won't even be an earth to live on if we wait that long for good leadership. This is about leadership, not so much women versus men. It's about what better leadership looks like. It's about a better dialogue, it's about better decisions, it's about better morale, it's about people coming to meetings better prepared, it's about leadership. So my final note to you, really quick lessons that I've drawn from leadership and life, if I was to sum it up. There is no easy picking when you decide to become a leader. It's hard work whether you want to make it to the World Cup as our football team did, or whether you want to run for office, any office at all. But it's very important that when we decide to run for office, be we women or men, that we run as ourselves, that we embrace our authentic values and our authentic voice and let it be heard. We don't need more women around the table if they bring just what they've learned from men. We need them to bring their difference. And it's very important that we all realize that we should be able to bring the best version of ourselves to leadership. I also find that it's incredibly important to work with people who share your values. But that's the only sameness you should have around the principles or the values that you care about. In every other way, we should be looking for differences, because that's what brings out a better dialogue and better decisions. I also have to share with you that running for office is exhausting, and running for president was for me. So you have to realize that you have to invest your time and energy in self and others who raise your energy. Get rid of energy drainers from your life. I'll share one story with you. I met an infamous PR expert who told me when I was making my decision to run that at the most I could achieve 7% of the vote. Now, I was thankful for his input because it was valuable and based on his experience, but he didn't really believe in the journey that I was going on. So I decided not to keep him around, even if he had expertise, because I needed people who would believe. So I had the courage to get rid of a lot of other people who wanted me to quit on the 1% day. And by surrounding myself with people who certainly would question me, I didn't need yes people, but would be aligned in that this journey was an important one, I was able to go the distance. Last but not least, I hope that everyone in this room makes it their quest in life, in Olympic leadership or sport leadership, to bring about gender balance. But whatever you decide to do, make sure that you embrace your quest in life. Make sure you have a quest in life, because life of leadership is too hard to be working on something you don't care about. So embrace your quest. And with that said, I'm going to end by throwing a football to the male leader that will stand up and say, I'm going to embrace this quest, because we need you men to be as passionate about this as we are. And I'm glad to see so many of you. So I'm looking for the male leader, and of course it can't be the speakers. Yes, we have a winner. So pay attention. I'm so glad he's here, because, you know, even if I played handball, are you ready to embrace that quest? All right. Nice job. Thank you.
Okay, I warned you it was going to be energizing, right? So, thank you, Halla, for some fantastic words. I'd like to introduce to you now the other three members of the panel who are going to be just as interactive, just as inspiring, and then we'll kick off with the session. So, first of all, we have Mr. Raffaele Pagnozzi, no, did it wrong, who is the Secretary General, I'm sure he needs no introduction, of the European Olympic Committee, and before that was Secretary General of the Italian Olympic Committee. Joining Raffaele and Halla, we have Caitlin Kraft-Buchman. Caitlin is the CEO and founder of Women at the Table and co-founder of the International Geneva Gender Champions. And last but very much not least, Maurizio Mosca is the Stakeholder Relations Officer for the European Institute for Gender Equality, and he's lucky enough to be based right here in Vilnius. So, very briefly, we heard this morning from President Bach, he mentioned several times, this is a critical first step. It's time for women to stand for office. And he said it repeatedly, and obviously, clearly, this has to be the first step, because all of the plans and strategies and objectives have got to be meaningless unless we actually have the candidates, unless we have women who are prepared to come and put ourselves forward. But a couple of speakers this morning also talked about getting out of our comfort zones in doing this. And they were right. It is uncomfortable. Often we feel afraid of failure. Sometimes we feel that we're underqualified. Maybe we're not fully aware of the opportunities that are there. And so really it's going to be the responsibility of all of us in the room today, when we leave this forum, to make sure that we are there to encourage our female colleagues to step up, to stand up, to become aware of the opportunities, and that we're there to really support them during and after their campaigns, whatever the outcome, whether they end up with success now or success later. So, as I say, without further ado, we have a fantastic panel this afternoon. The format is going to be a couple of questions that have already been put to each panel member, but everybody on the panel is really keen that this is going to be an interactive and lively session. So as you're listening, please be thinking about further questions that you would like to put to the panels, and obviously be prepared to share your own points of view. So, the people on this side of the room, and I think, Raffaele, if we can start with you, please. So you have a long and extensive career in the sports world, and you're familiar with the Olympic movement and its special nature. So what measures has the IOC put in place in order to have more women in decision-making positions?
But first of all, I have to say that I'm not so old, because you started to say that in my life I had a long life in sport moment. I have to say very, very sincere that we did not enough for many years. I think just as other organizations where the dominance of men, not natural, seemed almost natural. So for sure, IOC is not at the top of the ranking like Halla showed us before. But I think that the situation is changing. Thanks to the commitment of women like Daina, like Sarah, because both Daina is the chair, both are members of our IOC Gender Equality Commission, and I have to say that they made a very, very fantastic job, because you have to consider that in the quadrennial before this, we had the Commission for Gender Equality, but we didn't find any woman to chair this commission, and Sasha Kozlowski is a man. led this commission. So I think that the road is very, very long. And you have also to consider that Daina was co-opted in the executive committee of the IOC, just to open the door to women, because in this 4 years period, we have only Gunilla Lindberg in our executive committee, but Gunilla Lindberg is there in his position of ANOC, the Association of all the National Olympic Committees of the world, Secretary General, and for that she is ex officio member. So Daina is the only one, and Daina in our executive committee represent only something less than 10% of the members. When, as you know, probably this number we will hear many times in these 2 days. The average of European National Olympic Committees, the executive committee of our National Olympic Committees, are close to 20%. So we in our top body of the IOC, we don't reflect the reality of our NOC. So the road is very long. In our commission of the IOC do better because there we have 1/3 of the members women, more or less the same figures of the IOC commission, because this morning Thomas Bach told us that in the IOC commission they have 38, if I understood well, 38% of women. So the commission, a little lower level, we are in a better situation. I have to say that I'm very proud to add that at least the staff in our head office in Rome, the head office of IOC, the staff is half and half. So half female and half male. Not at the same level of Lithuanian National Olympic Committees, because this morning we heard that they are, Daina has got more women than men, but I think that this is a good start for the IOC. And now we are working very hard to recover lost time, and also to get women to apply for top position in our organization. And I can say, probably not many of you who know this, that for the election for the next 4 years in IOC, we have 4 candidates, women. So this is something that can help. We have 12 positions in our executive commission. So we can say that if they, all the 4 will be elected, it will mean that 1/3 will be women. It's difficult always to find the vote, and I think that if the 4 will follow the example of Halla, they for sure they will win, and they will be elected. So for sure we have to do more than this. We have to do more than this, and it's not so bad if at the end we will have 4 women in our executive committee. In any case, it means that the trend is on up. So for sure, the situation is improving.
That's key, isn't it? It's accepting where you are. It's being honest about where you are, but it's also about looking to the future
Yes.
and seeing what you can do. And on that theme, so the panel here is about women stepping up and putting themselves forwards. As a man in the position that you have, what can men do? What do you believe that men can do? We heard this morning from President Bach about this being a men's and women's. It's a human rights issue, he described it as, not a women's issue. What can men do to help, do you believe?
I think that, first of all, men shouldn't be afraid of women. In this period, I think that men in the sport environment should be afraid of men incompetent, because now we are facing something very, very strange, and probably we have time later to speak about that. So I think that the entrance, the arrival of more women will be for sure something better, not only for the image, not only for the statistic, but I think above all for the substance, because we need new blood in this environment. So I think that we are doing our best. We are doing what we can do in our condition, and I think that hearing the figures this morning, in my opinion, is not enough to follow the growth of good numbers in the Olympics, because if we consider that in the Olympics of 60s, the participation of the women at the time was not much more than 10%. In London, we have seen that 44% of women participating in the game, and above all, women participated in every sport. In Rio, we arrived 45.2%. This is important, with 136 events for women, 4 more than in London, out of 306. And Thomas Bach today said that in the yoga Olympic Games in Buenos Aires, we will have 50-50. And in Tokyo, only some strange rules avoid to allow to have the same number. So it is good, but I think that in the field of sport competition, the gender equality works better than in the position of leadership in sport. This is clear, and 2 days ago I read that in Norway there won't be more difference, economical difference between
the players,
women,
yes,
and the players, women and men, the same money for both. And yesterday, the Minister of Gender Equality in Italy announced a table of discussion together with the Minister of Sport to discuss about this argument. But you can imagine the reaction on the web. Many comments in favor, but a lot against. But in favor
so
or against, it means that the argument is in the center of the attention of people. So this is good, in my opinion.
Thank you.
This is what I think. But for sure, we not only must change the mentality, we must change also the language and also the terminology, because, for example, now in IOC we change something, because normally in sport events you can see reference to ladies program. We changed and we have a company person program. It means that all the words able to underline the dominance of the man must be changed.
Thank you. Okay, we'll come back to you again in a moment. Caitlin, if I can turn to you. So founder and CEO of Women at the Table, co-founder of the International Gender Champions. Can you tell us, please, a little bit just about how you came to start up those initiatives?
Well, Women at the Table was established to make both women and gender visible on the global stage in places where women are generally, in places of power, where generally women are not seen. So we focus on governance, the economy, technology, sustainability, and now sport. And IGC, which is the International Gender Champions, is one of our initiatives that was formed in partnership with Women at the Table. Sorry, I'm a bad speaker. Formed in partnership with the Director General of the United Nations in Geneva and the then U.S. Ambassador to the UN in Geneva, since replaced by the Swedish Ambassador, soon to be replaced by the Canadian Ambassador, because we have a revolving door of officials that work with us. We have, and what we founded was a leadership network of men and women, powerful leaders, working together as decision makers to break down gender barriers. So we started with, as I said, the Director General of the UN in Geneva. We have, because we're all based in Geneva, the head of the WTO, the head of WHO, head of ILO, WIPO, ITU, every major international organization in the world has joined, the heads of those organizations, which are all at the moment men, plus ambassadors from many, many member states, and civil society, of course, and a little bit of the political world and the corporate world that we're bringing on relatively slowly. So that's also brought us to New York, where the Secretary General of the UN, who was one of our first gender champions in Geneva, as the head of the High Commission of Refugees, is now our gender champion, and we have a basis in New York. We have also the heads of all the international organizations in Vienna, beginning with the head of the IAEA, who is the Atomic Energy Commission, is a major gender champion, and of course all the time member states, civil society. We're about to go to Bonn, Berlin, where the head of the Climate Change Protocol has signed on, and she's going to bring on that whole sort of axis in Bonn, Berlin, where much of the UN is, and we're going to stage the Gender Action Plan that will be approved at COP23, which we think is very important. And I've just came this week from The Hague, where we have ambassadors and also members of the International Court of Justice, judges and prosecutors that are joining on. So what do we have all in common? What we have with all of you in this room, it's leadership of women and men and women, looking at gender equality as something that we don't really discuss why, where I'm from at the moment. We just say why. It's because we know that the outcomes are better. You have better governance. It actually is self-evident, and if it's not self-evident to you, we ask you to just go read all of the McKinsey reports on how it improves the economy.
So just picking up on two words you've said there, which is leadership and why. Why, in your opinion, is it that women aren't already successful in the highest echelons of leadership? What do you think has happened there?
Well, I'd flip it around. So I think, again, I think it's all framing, and I think it's all about linguistics. And so I'm going to flip it around and say, how can we help men? What we see, what happens when women do participate, and there's something that we have, it's in common throughout every field. It's common in politics, and that is when an alpha male, a charismatic, dynamic, very powerful male decides that women should be included, and he makes it happen. We saw it in Spain from the transition from Franco. At that particular point, they happened to have a prime minister who had felt very much the other, who became and brought women in to that political system. We've seen that in Rwanda, where there was, with the genocide, and all of a sudden the country needed to be rebuilt. And we see it, we need charismatic men to lead the way. We see that now with, an example is from the UK, where the governance, the great FTSE 100 was asked to bring on women onto their boards. And there, the government said, we'll bring in quotas if you can't figure this out yourself. They stuck Lord Davies, who is an eminence grise, a man of great power and heft. He then went out and he recruited several other lords from FTSE. They ran out and recruited chairmen, And they did a bunch of things that I'd like to talk about just to change infrastructure, because it's an infrastructure problem. They created a code of conduct for all of the executive recruiters. And they put the responsibility on the recruiters, on the headhunters. And they said, when you bring us a long list, we want 50% men and 50% women who fit the profile. People who are highly qualified, who are exceptional, but 50% of each, otherwise go back and do your work again. Next, when they got to the short list to actually fill the board seats, they said there have to be 50% men and 50% women. Again, exceptional people, but it has to be 50-50 on the list. And what the statistics show us is that if you have 50-50, women have a 25% chance of being elected. But if it's less than 50-50, the percentage goes down to something like 10%, which is not great. So what I would say is you need targets. You need to be publicly accountable. In this case also, if there were companies that did not hit the targets, the Prime Minister, at that time David Cameron, wrote each a personal note to say, we're watching you and we see you haven't hit the targets. Do you want us to sort of legislate a quota? And what's happened is, it's really quite fabulous, is they doubled their numbers of women, because it turned out they needed just to look outside of the normal pool of candidates to a larger, more diverse group, not all the same old, and they were able to do it. On that, as I have more on my list, but that's
later. We'll keep. Thank you, Caitlin. So, Maurizio, just tell us to start with, please. How did you get involved in this field of kind of working on gender equality? Was there something special that pushed you into this role?
Well, first of all, thanks, and thanks also for the audience for being so active, and we are expecting to get questions and to have a very lively discussion. Actually, I will start with a bittersweet story, because my professional life in gender equality started with gender inequality itself. I got finally the chance to get an interview in a quite famous and accountable research institute in Italy. It's the institution that is dealing with European funds and research. So finally I made it to an interview, and the post was for the gender equality unit. So I was so happy to go there after I tried to push in all the way to go to work there. And the boss who interviewed me, a woman, told me openly, she had mentioned this story another time, so I can publicly tell. She told me, I have a team of 3 people. This time I'm going to hire a man because the other colleagues are female, and they are, in the last 2 years, eternally pregnant and always in maternity. So I was a little bit thrilled. I said, I can promise you 2 things. My complete devotion to work and not to get pregnant. But anyway, for me it was a success to get the job, but I left with this dark feeling that I made it because of my sex, beyond my brilliant CV at the time. So immediately I decided to do something for to pay back, so to say. And I was offered a post in a very important association, gathering around 500 people. And this committee, the executive committee, the president and 2 deputy president, were 3 men. So I said, I would like to step up for this committee, and I would like that a representative for this committee, instead of me, is a woman. The committee actually was the committee that was gathering all the people that were commuting daily from Naples to Rome by train. So not such an important organization, but at least I said I did something for the first time, and this is how I started.
Fantastic.
And this was 2004. Since then, I think I also
So, kind of building from there, can you just tell us a little bit about the studies that you've completed with the European Institute and some of the qualitative criteria that you've been developing?
Thanks for that. And just to give you a little bit of background, I mean, as the only autonomous agency of the European Commission working on gender equality here, the European Institute of Gender Equality, we work basically on EU policies in all EU member states. And during the Luxembourgish presidency, we have run a study on women and decision making. There is a section of this study that is focused on women and sports in governing bodies, and also the core of it is women and political decision making. Just to give you a few figures, you have heard about this before. From our analysis and from the available data, the share of women in decision-making bodies in sport in new member states goes between 8 and 42%. So there is a wide range. We can say that there is no direct correlation within having a member state with a solid, I would say, gender equality culture reflected then in the governing boards. So this that often is true, this fact is not true for sport. Also, I can tell you that together we were analyzing sport, research, and media. The numbers, the gap are bigger for sports. So sport is doing even worse than media and research that are highly male-dominated. And cherry on the pie, the presence of women in leading position decreases dramatically as the seniority of the post goes up. So it means as more leadership positions are available, less women are there. This is just to bring some happiness around the table and have a positive note, but the rest of the study, and I still have a 2-year contract, so I can run the risk to be a little bit politically incorrect. And I hope the Italian delegation will consider my application to go back to Rome at some point. I would like also to share the result of the study, but that basically dismantle some mantra that often we repeat. First of all, believe it or not, from what we found and what I personally believe, the underrepresentation of women does not depend on women. It's not because of women. Often we hear, well, you know, there is lack of skills, lack of self-confidence, the attitude is not like that. I think this is not true. And first of all, rarely in my 15 years career, I've heard about men in leading position having skills, attitude, self-confidence. It was never on the table. It was never asked that. So our analysis shows that this is not true. So if we want to move forward, we also have to dismantle some false information or some stereotypes, if you want. It's also true that from the study we heard that we discovered that it was mentioned by the other speakers, coaching, mentoring, capacity building, it's absolutely fundamental. And I do believe that this should be done for male leaders to be more aware of what gender inequalities are, what gender equality means, in order, I get your point, to transform the institution, transform the organization, not to change, because it's not a war between sexes, but it's in order to create better conditions. But you need to be aware what it means to have a gender inequality. I also appreciate what you said about the language. It is absolutely true. The most popular is a chairman or something like that. But language that seems to be something that is really poshy and funny. It's also a matter of fact, you care for the details, and gender equality means also to care for the detail and to care for the difference. I think that we know that there is a clear acknowledgement of the gaps that are available. Data are there. Even this event starts from, I would say, even acknowledging a political will to move forward. So it's not the time anymore to say, are we in an equal situation or not? Yes, we are. And it's evidence-based. It's not an ideological feminist position from the 68. It's because it is like that. And I think there is a role for men, but surely for leaders, either men or women, to push forward for this agenda, to improve the society, to improve the organization, and to engage all parts of the organization, women and men that compose our society, so that all these institutions, all these organizations will not only reflect the inequalities of our society, but will give space to the expectation and the opportunities of the society as a whole for both women and men.
Fantastic. Thank you. Halla, just returning to you, you've shared with us some really intimate kind of moments from your campaign, and also the roots of that in Iceland having started quite early on with a female president and leader. So why is it that in 2017 we're still having to talk about women coming out of our comfort zone? Why is that still a necessity, do you think?
Well, the quick answer to that, and I know this is not what you're after, is we need to be talking about it because we need better leadership. Our largest crisis in the world today is a leadership crisis. It's we see it everywhere. We see it in the White House. We see it all over the world. And so we need different leadership. And so to me, the reason we need to be talking about this is that we need better leadership. And gender balance is key to that, in my opinion. But why is it that women seemingly, and according to research and my own experience, are more hesitant to offer themselves up for leadership? I think there are internal issues. I am afraid that we still have a bit of a confidence gap. But I have to say, coming from Iceland, where I saw the ultimate in overconfidence in the years leading up to the financial collapse, that I wonder, is that a bigger problem, the confidence gap that women hold, or the overconfidence that we sometimes see in herds of men? I'm sorry to raise this issue because I know this is a bit controversial, but I actually think there are pretty serious consequences of sameness. And I think we've seen them in many kinds of organizations, from the private equity and venture capital, financial sector, where I have done some work, in politics, in sport leadership. I mean, we all know examples. So I don't think we need to talk about anymore, why do we need better leadership? We need better leadership. So let's talk about the how. And that's what I am really trying to talk about when I go out and say, let's be clear on, the principles that are the basis of our leadership. And fact of the matter is that humility is the cornerstone of good leadership. And I see this more often in women. This also means that they don't go around thinking that they're gonna, they're the God's gift to earth and that they have all the right answers. And so they're not very good at impression management. They're not very good at saying, I did this, and they say, we did this. And you know what? I actually think the world would be a better place if we had a little more we and a little less I. So maybe part of our conversation needs to move on from trying to fix women, turning them into men, because that way we lose the very gifts they have to bring to the table, and start talking more about fixing our culture. And our culture is based, whether it be in business or finance or sports, on the norms and the principles were created by men, mostly for men. That was a natural consequence of the world we lived in at the time. But the world is a very different place. And we need more humility, we need more collaboration, we need better communication skills, we need better ethics and better principles. And women can bring all of that to the table, and men. Yes. I actually find that with millennials, the younger people, there isn't such a difference between women and men. I actually think we all can bring a better version of ourselves to the table if we think a little bit more in terms of feminine values. That does not mean that women only can bring those values to the table. So, but we need to encourage women to run because there is still this confidence gap, there is this lack of role models, and there are these issues of humility, which I think can be their strength, that we need to help them overcome.
There's some real balancing acts, aren't there? I guess from my own country at the moment, a female prime minister going through some of this crisis of confidence. You were talking yourself about you need enough self-belief to get over the people who doubt you. You need enough self-belief to think that you're not a 1% or a 7%, that you could be a 30, and yet not so much that you're there. So how do you strike that balance?
Well, it's such an interesting experience for each and every person to get over self-doubts. But self-doubts are limiting thoughts, and they keep anyone, man or a woman, a boy or a girl, from being the best version of themselves. And we all have them. We have, apparently, according to research, 800 negative thoughts about ourselves every day, most of us. And I think women must have twice that. And there was a very interesting, I had a mentor, maybe even a sponsor early on in my career when I worked for M&M's in the US, who said to me when I was hiring the first cohort of people in my leadership career, when you ask a woman what she can do, about her skills, you might want to multiply it by 2 when she tells you what she can do. And when you ask a man, you might want to divide by 2. And then you have leveled the playing field. So this is where confidence and overconfidence perhaps comes in. This is in the early 1990s. And I've sort of kept that in mind. But what really pushed me over the edge when I was uncertain and experiencing self-doubts was a poem by Marianne Williamson. And many of you have heard it. And it goes something like this. I'm giving you the short version. All of us think, who am I to run for president? Or who am I to run for this office or run for leadership? I think all of us have these thoughts. At least if we're healthy, I think we should have those thoughts. But she said a better question is, who are you not to? I actually believe that inside of each and every one of us is a leader. And it's self-limiting thoughts that hold them back. We need everyone's voices and views around the table today to solve the complex challenges we have in every organization and certainly in the world. So I would just say that the best advice I have to get over these self-limiting thoughts is a healthy dose of meditation and sort of working on yourself, spiritual connection even, I would say, but also just to keep asking yourself, who are you to keep quiet in a world that doesn't make sense? That's my call for leadership, for women or men. Who are you to hold back when we all have something to offer to make this world and make this organization a better one?
Thank you, Caitlin. This seems to kind of strike a chord with you. I can see you particularly.
Well, I think it's so terribly important, but I think, and then to add on top of that, once we have this beautiful, holistic, strong place, I think we have to look at the institutional barriers that perhaps are the institutions that aren't in place to help women in this particular way. And one way, when I started to talk about recruitment, I've got to say that the next bit is to invest on onboarding, because when you're alone, because what you're really talking about, this is the loneliness of a woman who has to put herself forward. But once you are picked to run for something, also not to be, once you're elected, it's not the end of the road. So this code of conduct for these professional headhunters was to onboard people, to sit with them, to train them, and to also to train the boards, which were mainly 98% male, to understand how the culture needed to change, and there needed to be a different kind of openness and a different kind of discussion, on top of which also the sponsorship, right? So we hear a lot about mentorship, which turns out the research shows doesn't really work, but what does work is sponsorship, which men have been able to do for one another very effectively through the years, which is when you pick somebody and you actively push them forward, somebody else, and you try and help them throughout their career path. So I think first you start with your own self-confidence, of course, but that is just the first step on, sort of a longer path.
Oh my God, that's great. Raffaele, what do you think? Do you think there's an important role for role models, for sponsors, for people to both be supporting and inspiring from in front? Who do you think are the role models here?
I must say that we have many possibility to do that, and probably this is something different in accordance with the particular situation of the bodies. In IOC, we don't have a mechanism designed to defend the position of the women. Probably because at the time when the rules were written, it was not considered particularly a good solution. But I think that we should go in this direction. IOC must follow the 2020 agenda at this regard, but I think we have to do more. Before I said that I think that the first commitment of the new Gender Equality Commission is to fully review all the documents of IOC to cancel all the words related to the dominance of men. Yeah. I don't know in which way we can change chairman.
Chairperson.
Chairperson,
Just
yes,
chair.
but it's
Yeah.
a little bit
Chairwoman.
longer, but because
Size doesn't matter. I
Or
heard
just
it so
chair.
many times.
okay, chairperson. we can do like this is
making some
a good advice. So chairperson,
Okay.
because in this way we create a good environment for the women to be at the top position. But it's not only the problem of IOC. I think that the problem
For sure,
is
yeah, it's broader.
wider.
It's wider.
But if all the bodies will make one step, everybody can go in the same direction.
Okay, so just Maurizio, thinking about you obviously have a much broader experience than just sport.
Yeah.
What from all of your studies would be your one strong message for sport, for the sporting bodies in this room? What can we learn from other sectors?
I think that it's interesting to discuss also on what to do, I mean, solutions, because we are very well aware of the problem. And I think there are some steps that are important and such good suggestion from my research, but in general from experience. First of all, if there is, as it is now available, a sort of political will to move forward, there must be a political commitment. And this means that if you want to push things forward, you need to have a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
You need to look, as you were saying, to a structural transformation, an institutional transformation. This means that you set goals, objective, indicators, resources, and expertise. If you agree that gender equality is high on the political agenda, gender skills becomes a management skill. Then it doesn't matter if it's a woman in a leading position or a man, because we will only achieve gender equality if there are better men and better women. So it's not only, I mean, the biological participation that will move forward. So integrating the gender perspective into the political agenda with proper setting, as I said, strategy, resources, and expertise, this is fundamental. You need to have people with a specific knowledge to drive the process. Another important thing is not to be afraid, I know that we are stepping in a very dangerous context, to have what is called positive measures. If you want to balance some very unbalanced situation, you need to fine-tune the situation and adopt some specific measures, not for the long term, not as a single measures, but in a wider gender mainstreaming strategy. I will not mention the word quota, not to open the discussion on that, but specific measure targeting a specific imbalance. That could be, we think that at management level, at board level, there is not enough gender knowledge. Okay, why not mentoring, coaching, and training session in boards on gender issues? The participant might be only men, so be it. I mean, we are not afraid of that. I think it's also important to continue to collect, analyze, and report on data. You need a series, an history of trends, gaps, and also this reporting must be accountable. Someone must report on that and take actions, so that you show that the trends are not ideological, but it's just a matter of fact, and then you can use this kind of analysis for political decision making. And I also think that it's very important to establish bodies, committees. Someone was mentioning network. I can tell you from our study a big difference between local elections or elections in rural areas or election at national level. Where women's network or gender equality network were active at local level or even in rural areas, the way for women to go to leadership position in parties and in political assembly was easier, because they are very connected to the community and they can also be more visible. This doesn't happen at national level, where this sort of process is led by parties and organizational and institutional rules. So I think that setting specific bodies, possibly mixed, not only composed by women, but also men, to push forward the gender equality agenda within the institution would also help.
Be there. Thank you. Just before we move on to the general conversation, Halla, you put a very scary statistic out there at the end of your speech, which was that there was a risk of the planet coming to an end before this kind of 100-year time frame for the equality to be reached. But what for you would be a realistic time frame?
Now, to be honest. Yeah, I don't mean to use scare tactics, but the fact of the matter is, I don't care where you are in this climate debate or somewhere else, the world as it is right now isn't sustainable. And then we can debate how long it will take and what form it will take. But I once said, sort of accidentally, that I don't think it is a coincidence that it takes the DNA of a man and a woman to create life. Why wouldn't it take the DNA of both men and women to sustain life? And organizations are nothing but life, at least if we want them to go on. And so, and I want to share a positive experience from my country. I mean, we lead the way, but we haven't closed the gender gap. We have a pay gap, and we woke up one day and we thought, okay, we have the highest work participation of women anywhere. So speaking just about participation is not enough, because we don't see them in positions of power and influence, particularly in the highest offices of business. So we decided, and I took opportunity as the first female CEO of the Iceland Chamber of Commerce to sort of work behind the scenes on creating voluntary targets to reach gender balance in the boardroom. And we defined it as 40-60. We worked with the Congress and our Parliament and our women's organizations and the business organizations to agree that 12% women on boards was not balanced, so we were going to improve it. We set a 5-year time frame to get from that to what we thought was balanced, 40-60% either gender. And I asked, somewhat cleverly, the business leaders, who are all very competitive, how long do you need to get this done? And they told me, we can get it done really fast, because the business case is there. I said, well, how long do you need? Somebody said 3 years. I said, oh, I'll give you 5. And then we negotiated with our parliamentarians. If we don't get there, then we will introduce a gender quota law. But we told business, we don't have to put it into law. Let's just get it done. It's good for business, it's good for society. And in 5 years, we had gone far, from 12% to 25%, but that's not balanced. So gender quota law was introduced. And at the time, about 2/3 of women board directors were in favor of the law, but less than half of male board directors. The law was introduced in 2013. Last year, we got the results in, and 90-something% of women board directors think that this has been a great progress, and this has changed the boardroom dynamics in such positive ways, and 2/3 of male board directors. So once we experience gender balance, it is good for all of us. It is not a zero-sum game, women taking away from male power. It really is growing the cake. It's about economic growth for those of us in that business, and it's about better dynamics for those of us in organizations like yourself. So I think we should just do it now, because we need good leadership now.
Fantastic. Okay, right. We've covered pretty much every academic area you can consider in the opening comments from the panelists. We've gone through economics, business studies, philosophy, linguistics, all kinds of different areas. So really read from that no question is out of bounds, and that you can ask anything you like of this panel of individuals. I'm hoping there's a couple of people around with microphones who are cleverly dressed in green in a green room with green curtains, so you may not be able to see them unless they wave their hands. But who would like to open the bidding and ask the first question? And I will impose a quota. Thank you. Bring a microphone. And feel free, by the way, to ask either a specific panel member or just address it to the panel in general and see who'd like to be there. What would you like to ask?
Thank you. My name is Nadia, and I work for the National Olympic Committee of the Czech Republic as a chairwoman for Committee of Equal Rights or Equal Opportunities in Sport. And my question goes to Halla. Maybe it's not a question, but maybe your opinion. We have in my country quite enough women in business, in leaderships, quite enough. And for me, sport is also business. why we don't have so many women in sport. What is the main reason? And second, it's not the second question, it's connected. You mentioned in your presentation that in 2007 you met your friend, you worked together, and you succeed and didn't lose money because you work on more balanced principles. I have no idea how to formulate more balanced principles in sport. So, if you can answer.
Thank you. Okay,
So
so key differences.
Just to make sure I understood your question correctly, you're asking why you have some success with women in business but less so in sports, was your first part. Why could that be? One. Number two, you want to know sort of what are these more feminine principles you could introduce in sports? Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you. Well, thanks for a very good question. I mean, I'm not an expert in sport leadership, but I have spent a lot of time breaking down barriers in lots of other sectors, in entrepreneurship, in finance, in the boardroom, even in education. And we see similar imbalances almost everywhere. There is not that much difference. And I think my honest and frank answer is that sport is still, which is part of why I wore this a lot during my campaign, sports is still very much where real men get together, you know, isn't it? And so I think sport is unfortunately founded on very masculine principles. Whereas, and I will go back to this, why did the Icelandic football team manage to do so well? I mean, it's a tiniest nation in the world. We've built this team. And I will just quote the leader of the team, the coach, who said when they lost to Finland, they went back to basics and revisited the values that they have been working on. Part of them being humble or humility, part of them being hard work. I mean, he actually went back to some values that many people would say are feminine values. And they're doing incredibly well because there's no one person on the team that's bigger than the rest of the team. There's no huge egos that are trying to outshine everybody else. And I can tell you, in business or in any leadership, if you have these larger-than-life leaders who take up all the space, the sun never shines on anybody else. And I'm afraid sports has sort of created that world, just like finance has. In finance, there are these big rainmakers and deal makers who are larger than life, and sometimes nothing grows around them. And so I'm going to be very frank here and say I think the response to the first question is we still have to break down that tendency to be stuck in very masculine principles in the sports world, and maybe we have just further to go there, but it's everywhere. And breaking down masculine principles doesn't mean breaking down men, because inside of all of us is a spectrum of feminine and masculine. And the best leaders, they draw from both. They're in balance. That's good leadership. So that's my first answer. The second one is, what are the feminine principles then? There's lots of studies out there, and some of them think a lot about biology, others a lot about sociology. But the fact of the matter is that when we ask people, and probably the most famous book I can point you to is called the Athena Doctrine, which talks about the qualities of good leadership. And it turns out that most of us, more than 2/3 of us around the world, think that some of the qualities we typically think of as feminine are indeed the qualities we need for leadership. But they aren't necessarily what you would think. One is, for example, we tend to have more innovation when we have more women around the table. We tend to have more initiative when we have more women around the table. So, you know, it's always scary to stereotype, but I really believe that we can't be good leaders unless we can draw from both. And the world has been one-sided. It's like we're looking at everything with one eye opened. Why in the world would we do that if we could use the eyes, the voice, the head, heart, and the hands of both women and men? So it's a complicated question you raise, but I hope that gives you some idea. We have to redefine what it means to be a real man. And a real man is someone who respects his mother, his sisters, his daughters enough to know that they have as much to offer as their sons, their fathers, their brothers. That's a real man.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Next person who would like to ask the panel something.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. National Olympic Committee of Georgia, Head of International Relations. So we know that this gender balance is quite a core issue for a long time period, and it was also mentioned this morning that it is just still much is to be done, and we are progressing very slowly. Judging by the European countries, there the situation is better because somehow the problem is less there from the gender balance. But as for, there are countries with where this traditions are, country traditions and cultural traditions are more patriarchal. And here in that countries, it's more difficult to reach, to overcome this gender balance. And having you on the panel, such a qualified, experienced people, who work in this field for a long time, it will be very interesting to know your just advice and your recommendations. What opportunities, what possibilities can we use in such countries in order to overcome this problem, so that to reach balance, not only in sports, but also in politics, in government, Thank you.
Okay. So, Raffaele, maybe the first piece of this question would go to you, which is, I think, if I've understood you right, there's a really broad spectrum in the different national Olympic committees, those who are just starting off, those who are more developed, but really what would be an example or a couple of examples of a concrete first step that could be taken no matter what stage of development you're at?
I have to say that for me it was not so easy to understand quite well what Rusico said, but I imagine what she was saying. I think that we can have many possibilities to help because in Europe we have different countries. For sure, we have countries like Iceland. So for them, probably this argument is very easy to be understood. But for old tradition in some other country, the situation is very different. But we have some fields in our activities in IOC, and through these we can help the NOCs to make step ahead in this direction. First of all, we have the Commission, and in the Commission we, as I told you before, we put at disposal more places for women. In this case, as Rusico well knows, we help the countries with the tradition, not at the same level of other countries, but for sure in the next quadriennial we will launch. We have money coming from the Olympic Solidarity to help the activities of our NOCs, and normally we give money accordingly with the application of these NOCs. But if in the next 4 years we found some lines to underline that in these special activities we can give a sort of preference to activities related to develop the role of the women in our organization, in the national organization, I think that this can help concretely the situation, because for us it's important to have new people.
So not only ideas, sharing case studies, but actually some very pragmatic help as a project team and also with funding. Sure. And Caitlin or Maurizio, anything that you guys would like to add to that?
I mean, we wrestle with culture a lot in Geneva, right? So all the nations are represented there. And recently we did an event with the ambassador from Fiji, who actually is the chief negotiator for the climate change conference. And she said, who comes from a very patriarchal culture, also Islamic culture, she said, look, culture is supposed to liberate, it's supposed to empower, it's supposed to be something we love and we're proud of. When culture holds us back, it's not doing its job. So I thought that was really interesting. So she just said we have to embrace what is beautiful and great about our culture, and we don't need to actually pay attention to the rest. I've got to just say one thing that occurred to me sitting here. You know, it seems to me that this is a kind of a sports opportunity. That I'm looking at it in a weird way. It's the regular coaching that needs to happen is exactly what happens in sports. You see somebody who's gifted, you help them become even more gifted. That's what we call sponsorship in the world that I come from. You train people, everybody trains and works very hard. Again, that's where we're training male board members and female board members to have a gender lens in the decisions they make, that there's nothing wrong with training. We all know that that's what makes you a champion at the end. And then I'm wondering whether you don't need to make it a competition amongst yourself about who's going to get there fastest, and you really use the best of the Olympic spirit of wanting to be the best and to win the gold, and you just say who's going to bring us all the way to gender equality, because you can do it.
Fantastic. So applying our own values to ourselves.
Rating your NOCs, it would be interesting.
Maurizio.
No, just to contribute to your question, we say today, we acknowledge today that the situation is different in different countries. So we also need to acknowledge that the progress has a different pace in different places. And a suggestion coming from our work is that it's interesting also to learn from the others, to create opportunities, I don't know, to collect good practices and have a peer learning, a mutual learning, because same organization talking to other organizations can learn better instead of someone coming, especially from some EU institution, saying you could do that. But if you talk, you also remove the fear that sometimes is rooted in these patriarchal patterns, that change means that you will lose something, that the situation will be worse, that you will lose your power, or there will be some knights coming and removing kings and queens. So to learn from others, to ease the process of a better understanding, and also to acknowledge that in some places it will take longer, not to accept, as we were saying, there is progress, but it's very low. Okay, this is good, but at the end this is not so good, because personally I don't plan to live 200 years more, but I'd like to see some change. But to learn from others can create a better understanding that can lead them to a more sensitive political will that will allow change and transformation.
Okay. Next question. They've been easy questions so far. See how challenging you can make the question as well.
Hello, my name is Dominique. I'm from Belgium. I am a new board member, so I'm increasing the percentage in Belgium of women within the board.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I have a question to Halla. First of all, I wanted to congratulate you for your speech, because it was very inspiring, but also very energizing as a woman. I have two questions. The first one, I think maybe it's an issue for a lot of women, is how did you manage your work-life balance? Because when you go for president, I guess your personal life is a little bit more difficult to manage once you go for your career. And the second one, I think for a lot of women, it's a barrier, because you have your family to go for your dream, or have the courage to go for any goal. My question is, which advice would you give to the women who maybe are doubting to step into their goal or have the courage to do that? Which advice do you give to them?
Thank you.
For me?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. It's interesting because our current president and the one who won the election, he was the father of 4 children, and they were much younger than my children. And I never heard media ask him about his work-life balance, but I got asked Not only how I would manage the children, but also how I would manage my husband. Or what to do with my husband, what to call him, and I got all kinds of interesting questions about it. And there was one newspaper who decided not to really talk to the presidential candidates because there were so many, but they decided to do an interview with the wife of our president today, who's a very interesting woman and justified, but they didn't really know what to do with my husband. How could they interview a husband of a potentially powerful woman? So we still have these issues even in the gender-balanced country of Iceland, where it's not a level playing field. But my quick answer to your question is I married well. And that was by deliberation. And so I married someone who was comfortable enough in his own skin to support me, but I also support him. We complement each other, and I don't think it's just my responsibility to be a parent to those 2 teenage children. And it never has been just my responsibility, it's a partnership. And I also have a great mom. And she is retired, and I probably could not have done it without the 2 of them. And living in a country where we have a great infrastructure for, childcare. Mine are not at that age anymore, but it's sometimes more difficult to have teenagers. So I relied on people around me. It was a short-term sacrifice. I missed a lot of valuable moments. It wasn't always easy for me. But I made sure to schedule time where we would go to the cabin, just the family, and we would talk about all the issues that I so worried about bothering them. But it turns out that kids are pretty smart. And the way I realized on election day how I had made a positive impact on my daughter really was helpful with this, because I think sometimes we women hold ourselves back to be great moms. But to be great moms, let's be role models for our daughters and our sons, because we need a different kind of leadership. And I do this work for them, because I do want them to live in a world that makes sense and is sustainable. And I think we just need to get over it, but we need to marry well. And it's helpful to have a retired mom. That's the first part of the question. The second part, what advice do I have? Well, marry well. And I don't mean a rich guy. I mean somebody who has the confidence to support you. And it takes, and actually my husband has a lot of confidence from sports. Interestingly, his confidence comes from sports. I mean, he played football, and you're going to laugh at this, but the way I paid for university in the United States, because university is free in Iceland and I wanted to go to the US, was I managed the men's soccer team in Alabama. And that was quite a shock for them. This is before the internet, so when I applied in writing, they didn't really know a woman was showing up, I think. So they about had a heart attack in the South. But my husband was actually the last guy I recruited from Iceland to the team, because they didn't really know football in the south of America, so I needed to bring in Nordic players to improve the team, and I brought in my husband. I knew him for 8 years before he became my husband, so he had kind of gotten to know me as the manager of the men's football team, and so I guess he got he saw what he would be living with, I guess. And I'm lucky in that way. But my advice is marry well, and I'm not joking. I think it's important to be in partnerships, and I think partnership also means that you sometimes take the backseat. And it's a little bit of a jiggle throughout those most difficult years when your children are young. My second advice is do the work on yourself. Because I think too many of us, and this goes for women and men, wait for something outside of ourselves to change our lives, for the government to change our life, for the leadership that's there to change our lives. But I believe we sit in the driver's seat in our own lives. But we need to do the work to know who we are, why we are here, and how we are going to go through life. Once we're clear on that, and that's a lot of work on yourself, anything is possible. Anything is truly possible once we're clear on that. So best advice I have, get over that self-doubt and imposter syndrome by doing the work on yourself. Know what you stand for, know what you want to do in this world, and know how you want to do it. And there is no limit to what you can and should achieve.
Yeah. So there's something also, isn't there, about this word balance, which often implies 2 very heavy things pulling away from each other or counteracting each other. And there's something about whether it's blurring work and life, whether actually for a lot of us who are lucky enough to work in sport and something that we're really passionate about. Work and life are not two completely distinctive things that need to be pulled apart from each other, and they can be actually combined, and especially if now that we're able to utilize so many different technologies and ways of working that mean that we can and do what we want to do when we want to do it, I think there's more opportunity now. But I'd like to hear the male side of this balance, of this work-life balance.
I really want to say that a very brief thing. I will not start from the age of time, but during the Industrial Revolution, there was a crisis in the factory. They need people to work. So women were allowed to work any time at any hour because they had to go to purchase fruit or prepare the meal and take care of the kids. And this has been rooted then in the organization of the work. If we are looking at the problem of work-life balance and we are targeting leadership role, we should say what the organization has to do to allow the leaders, the managers, to reconcile work and life. If we put the question, what the organization has to do to allow women to take care of kids, of the elder, to run for leadership posts, we are only reinforcing a stereotype that will not push things forward. Because I think also men need to have the opportunity and the duty, but also the beauty to exercise, I don't know, fatherhood, paternity, or supporting the female partners. And we need to be very careful, because if this message comes from us, that we are probably the supporters, then imagine what is the risk that we're running. So,
thank you.
I would say that this is something, what Stanford says now. In the 80s, we said, we need more women, get the numbers of women better. And then in the 90s, they got a lot of women, and they said, it's not working, we've got to fix the women. And they trained the women, and then they turned around. The only thing that changed was they said, what the women are really very aggressive, and we must have done something wrong. And now they say, what we have to do is fix the institutions. The institutions are not made, they're built on, exactly to your point, they're built on having two people in a family, one of whom is dedicated to glorious unpaid work, supporting the family while the other person goes out and takes care of their career. And we need to help change that balance. And we also need to have the institutions allow for a lot of those changes. So we have to balance the way that we're addressing the problem too.
Thank you. Okay, more questions? 2.
Any male question?
Make sure we get male questions too.
I was going to say, yes, maybe gentlemen first.
For once.
That's the first time in my life.
First.
Brave man.
Michael Vesper from Germany, from the DOSB, the country where we have a chancellor who is since 12 years a woman. And if you ask for the reason why you have so few women in the sport organizations, then the answer is always that we have not enough candidates for that. And of course you have to encourage. You have said many things about this. You have to encourage, you have to give incentives and so on for that. But as I am a former politician and a founder of a party, namely the Green Party in Germany, I can just report that we had, after some years of existence, when we also tried to get more women into responsible positions, we invented a rule. And this rule is, every list you make in Germany for an election for the Green Party, the women have the uneven positions and the men have the even positions. So number 1 is always a woman, therefore I'm so surprised. Number 2 is always a man, and so on. Even Joschka Fischer, our famous foreign minister, was on position 2 and not position 1. That is, of course, maybe a little bit too early. You spoke of 3 to 5 years until such changes can come. But in this case, it was like this, that women who never in their life thought to become a politician, they were, in a sense, forced to candidate on this list. And by chance, they become members of parliament or even minister. And they were very good politicians. So sometimes you need such a, I don't know how to in English, Tritt in Hintern. Huh? A kick in the ass, yeah.
Okay.
to encourage women to go for such positions. But my last sentence is, my experience in this system is that the women are not the better human beings. You have all things you see with men in the corporation, you would see also with some women. But that could be a suggestion.
Right. Okay, so kicking women into office is the title now. What's your question?
Yes, thank you. My name is Rinda den Westen. I'm a relatively new board member in the Netherlands, and with me that makes us almost 50%, so we're very proud of it.
Fantastic.
But I have a question. You said maybe we can make it a bit more awkward or difficult.
Yeah.
This is one I really wonder myself a lot. In my career so far, I find that I've not been having trouble with the men around me. But my question is about the women, and I really find this a hard question to address and to answer, because even this question about career and work-life balance, those were the questions that women asked me, not men. And also the questions raised with the quota or the things that you said, Halla. I completely recognize what you said about women holding themselves back, but also women holding each other back. That I find is in so many places the real problem. And I'm very happy that we have men and women here together, because I really would like to have an answer on this question. What can we do as women, but also men, if you recognize my question, of course, and are we allowed to say this out loud, that we need to support women and each other more than we do now, lots of times?
Great. I think so the answer to that last question, are we allowed to say it out loud? Yes, we definitely are. I think that's the purpose of having a very open forum like this one. I think all of our panel members have been very open and very honest. So yes, we can. And certainly just before we hand it over, that was a real experience for me when I first started working. I think it goes to a point that Caitlin was making. The very senior women who had clawed their way up were so scary, were so completely not role models for any of us. We were terrified to enter their room because they'd felt they had to work harder than any of the men there to get the position. So it is, I think, a phenomenon. But I think your question, which is how can we as women help other women more, or support, I don't know who'd like to dive in first. Raffaele, go for it.
No.
Oh, okay.
Raffaele, you as a woman.
No, he can answer as a woman.
She was looking.
To the man from the Green Party, I think what's interesting is when you said at the end, you said that your experience has been women haven't been angels. You didn't say angels, but in the boardroom. And I think that that's part of it. I don't think we've come to think that there's two different things that are happening, because just having women isn't going to change things, right? And that's sort of to your point, because it's not all women. So first of all, I don't think that we should worship women as the answer to anything. I don't think that we should put them also on a pedestal. I think we're doing injustice when we try and do that, because there are plenty of, they're nasty people that are men, that are women, that are whatever. So that's number one. One thing is the numbers of women, and the other thing is the change makers, which in my work I would call the feminists, but here we can call them the change makers. So what you really need to do is to get people who are change makers in your institutions, which is actually almost a separate project than just getting the numbers of women, because just because women are there doesn't mean they're going to be change makers. That said, we should support each other. But you can't expect all women to support you just because they're women. You have to just find a really tough, fabulous group of loving women who are going to have your back and make that your team, to go on my sports metaphor. Sorry.
Can I go before that?
I support that.
You agree. Well, I want to respond to the founder of the Green Party, and thank you for founding a Green Party. I don't think, to all of you who did that, I don't think women are better than men, and I don't think men are better than women. I think gender balance is better than sameness. And I think it's important to make that clear. But I do think and acknowledge that to not sound too stereotypical, that we may bring different things to the table, which is why we're better together. So, and if I move on to your question, Madeleine Albright said, and you've all heard this, there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. I like to extend on that good sentence and say there's a special place in hell for men and women who don't support transformative leaders that are trying to do good in the world. And so I'm a big proponent of sisterhood. And I use the word sister a lot, and by the way, that includes women and men who want to change the sort of norms of patriarchy and masculine norms to become more inclusive for all of us. That's a sister to me, somebody who thinks about the bottom line as not just economic profit, but also care for the planet and the people who live on it. It's someone who pushes for responsible results. And so that's a sister to me, just to juxtaposition it to the brotherhood we all know so well. But I also have a term, and I'm going to get out on a limb since you asked the sort of question that sometimes people are afraid to ask, and that is there are definitely what I call men in skirts. Okay? So that's, what am I talking about here? Women who learn the rules of the game from men who mentor them, maybe even sponsor them, and they learn that perhaps the only way to get into positions of power, into the boardroom, and to be supported for positions of power is to behave according to the rules of the game that were created decades ago by men. And I definitely, early in my career, was one of those women. I sometimes say that I came out of the closet in my early 30s, not as a gay woman, not that there is anything wrong with that, but as someone who had the courage to say, I actually want to work as a woman. Because I do think I'm a pretty masculine woman, so there can be feminine men and masculine women, but I had to really sort of work on my courage to come out and really be all of who I am, and it has taken time. And I know this is sensitive to say this and I feel some empathy for the women who break down barriers, because if you don't play according to the rules of the game, you may never get into a position of power. When you are a token, you are a sample of the other. The only way you will ever belong is by adopting to the rules of the game. Otherwise, you become an outsider. So as long as the numbers are women are tokens or minorities, the danger is that most of those women are going to be men in skirts. But this is why I believe in quotas. This is why or targets or positive measures, because we need to get to balance before both women and men will become truly themselves. And one of the most interesting findings from boardroom research is that men actually find that the boardroom dynamics become better for them as well when we are at gender balance and not at tokenism. So, I'm not criticizing men in skirts. It has been the way to power for women. I'm just saying we are losing out on the very value of diversity. We are losing out on changing and transforming cultures if we teach women to be men. So let's get over that, and let's get together at some point and not talk about advancing women in leadership. Let's talk about advancing better leadership. It's about good leadership. Does that answer?
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So, who?
No more.
Elena.
Elena.
Just personal question. You're a successful woman who made nice career. Did you ever have in your personal life periods when it influenced your family life, when your husbands were not happy? Because you made better career, you had higher salary, I don't know, because I had it in my life. I remember it very well. And once I asked myself a question. Imagine for a moment that I'm a man. What kind of a woman I want to have as a wife? Whom I want to marry? A successful businesswoman, politician who makes brilliant career, or a woman who will spend more time with me, will devote more time for a family, whom I want to meet at home when I go home, made babysitters, or my wife who will pay more attention to me. Did you ever think about it? Because I personally thought that I would prefer to have a woman who will devote more time to me than to the career. And I remember some time ago when I was at the beginning of making my career, my husband was very unhappy and we had a lot of quarrels. I remember that I had invitations for some parties or for some business conferences, and I remember very well that on the envelope it was written, Anikina +1. And my husband said, I hate to be +1. You know, I'm sure that all ladies who make career are having these problems in family life. And it's difficult. How you overcome it, how you make and find this balance. Did you ever have these problems or not?
Caitlin, do you want to?
I think Halla said it right. I think you have to find a partner that thinks being a powerful, dynamic, ambitious, lively woman is sexy, and that solves probably everything. I mean, really, seriously, I think that all of us deserve to have partners who support us and want us to be fabulous, and we should reject partners that don't. So I would say that, which is hard, and I learned that the hard way. It took many years for me to arrive at this conclusion, but that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think, Halla, you were lucky enough to choose right the first time.
Oh, there's a long list of those who didn't like me the way I was.
Yeah.
So yes, this is a selection process, I believe, and you should probably put more effort into choosing your life partner than any other selection process you go through in your life. And I think behind very successful men is often a very supportive woman, and behind very successful women is often nobody or a special man. And I'm joking a little bit, but it is more common, it is more the norm that a woman supports a man's successful career. We know how to deal with that. So it takes a confident man, I think, to handle strong women who break through the barriers and norms in society. And I repeat my earlier advice, pick a great partner who has the confidence to support you, whether you're a man or a woman. But every once in a while, I will try to be Miss Mom or do something domestic and nice. And mostly I'm made fun of because I'm not very good at that. And I have some secrets I can share in addition. My husband went to chef school. He's a chef today. He used to be in finance, and he's much happier there. So I outsourced the kitchen. That's been very helpful to me, and he makes the best food, so everybody loves him. And so he gets a lot of credit from other things than I do. But he's also had a successful career, and for us, it is juggling. I've taken the back seat in the last couple of years because we had some challenges with our teenage children and moving countries to his career. And so I changed my life around a little bit, except for the presidential election, to support him. So I just don't really, I acknowledge that this is there, but I don't think we should ever hold ourselves back. But maybe we need to plan our lives a little better when we have two people who are going at it full force, and we also have children or parents who need to be taken care of. And I don't think anybody should live with a spouse who doesn't support them in being the best version of themselves.
Raffaele, what would you like to?
No, I have to say that I heard that normally behind a successful man is an important woman, no?
Yes.
So I have to say that in Italy we used to say that sometimes the exception will confirm the rule. I started my career after I became again single, after the separation and the divorce. So I don't know if this can help to find a good solution for the career.
Even people do it. Fantastic. Guys, I think we're out of time, but I wanted to say to everybody in the audience, thank you so much for your engagement in this. It's an incredibly long session, 2 hours, and I really feel like the energy has been there in the room. So thank you for your attendance, and please will you join me in saying a big thank you to each of our 4 panelists who I think have done a fantastic job. So to Maurizio, Caitlin, Raffaele,
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I think we now will hear what the next plan is.
President of Lithuania National Olympic Committee, Daida Gudznevičiūtė, has something to say.
Dear friends, tomorrow is Halla's birthday. And we didn't prepare the flowers because we don't know it. But I would like to invite she to be the part of our team, L team. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. How sweet. Thank you. Wow, I love it. Thank you so much. And just so you know why I'm wearing this, so we wouldn't be wearing the same jacket. Thank you so much, everybody.
This doesn't apply to me.
Our president was really inspired by Halla's speech, so she got something extra, and now we have some souvenirs for all of the speakers of the first panel. Okay, now we are supposed to have a short coffee break. We have around 30 minutes, and you are encouraged to discuss, to continue the discussion that we just had here for 2 hours. And we reconvene at 4 o'clock.